Since the first moment that you arrive here at the college, the first thing you see is the academic assistants. You're greeted by the student affairs office, and immediately the first thing you do is start meeting people.
In the beginning, it's a bit challenging to make an acquaintance with 350 people, but at the same time, we were so open here.
I think one of the great things is that everyone is in the same situation as you. No one knows anyone, and everyone is very eager to meet other people.
On se retrouve à 350 étudiants de 50 pays différents, directement dans le bain. Je dois dire que mon adaptation s'est fait assez vite, peu importe la culture.
The first big event of the college is, of course, the opening ceremony. This year, for example, we had the opportunity of meeting Jean-Claude Juncker. It was a very interesting start to the year.
Viva la protección, John Maynard Keynes.
Le Collège l'Europe nous propose différents programmes. Donc il y a économie, juridique, politique et relations internationales. Il offre aussi la possibilité de faire un double master en coopération avec l'université Flickr de Boston, des affaires transatlantiques.
The courses here at the college are very varied. In the first semester we start with the bigger classes, with the bigger groups. Then in the second semester we move to more specialized, smaller groups, and we have much more of a follow-up.
Les intervenants ont travaillé à des très hauts niveaux à l'ONU, dans les institutions. C'est un vrai atout.
The courses are also about personal development. There's courses in leadership, there's workshops in diplomacy. There's not only academic knowledge to be shared. The simulation games are very interesting. You get to apply the knowledge in a much more practical manner, and you get to do things that you will be doing after you graduate. You get to see how you would act as a lobbyist, how you would act as a representative for a country, how you would act as a politician, and you get to interact with other students and actually see which knowledge is applicable in real life.
When you work in team, you actually like learning by doing, you know, when you compared me in the beginning of this year, and right now I feel more comfortable with this, so that's really nice.
Moi je suis en économie, et en économie il y a encore des sous-divisions qui permettent d'affiner nos spécialités et vraiment d'avoir un menu à la carte en fonction de notre profil. On peut avoir une orientation plus politique, plus juridique, ou plus en relation avec du business, donc des entreprises. Et donc je suis ravie parce qu'il y a une diversité en termes de cours, il y a une diversité en termes d'intervenants qui viennent du secteur privé, du secteur public. Donc on a vraiment, je pense, une offre de cours de qualité et diverse. Et ça, c'est très appréciable.
We also have the National Weeks, which is a country or a group of countries get together to showcase their culture.
C'est marrant de voir nos copains cuisiner pour nous les plats typiques de leur pays, de nous faire découvrir quelque chose qui est très intéressant.
For example, for the Spanish National Week, we organized La Feria de Sevilla, and that helps a lot to bond.
On est 300 étudiants, plus de 50 nationalités et on vit tout le temps ensemble. On développe des liens sociaux qui vont résister à travers le temps et ça, c'est quelque chose de vraiment exceptionnel.
When you're living in some kind of like here in college, multicultural environment, it's kind of a challenge as well, because you need to have to take into account like a difference between us.
C'est très intéressant la vie au collège et c'est très prenant aussi, mais je pense que c'est important pour un équilibre de vie de pouvoir sortir un petit peu de cette bulle. Je fais du basket ici, je fais également du yoga, ça c'est vraiment chouette.
Yeah, there are a lot of difference between us, but at the same time we have the same values. We are we together, we could be stronger together.
Les résidences offrent aux étudiants beaucoup d'espaces communs qui leur permet bien sûr d'un côté d'étudier, donc il y a des salles d'études, mais à côté de ça il y a beaucoup de salles pour se détendre où les étudiants se retrouvent pour parler ensemble, pour jouer par exemple aux échecs. Il y a des jardins, des terrasses et simplement décompresser, parler d'autre chose que des études.
Pour moi, Bruges, alors je vais pas ressortir forcément les clichés de c'est la Venise du Nord, elle a quelque chose de magique et c'est même pas un cliché de dire ça, il y a vraiment une atmosphère spéciale. Les canaux, l'architecture, c'est une ville qui a du cachet et qui a de l'authenticité.
D'un point de vue géographique, Bruges a une situation parfaite parce que ses alentours offrent aux étudiants l'occasion de décompresser, d'aller voir la mer.
There is like a really short distance to Brussels. Actually, in 1 hour you can be like in the city center to meet with a lot of experts from the Commission, from the Parliament. It's like a huge advantage of Bruges. The support system in the college is pretty broad. For example, like student affairs, it's academic assistance, it's IT service.
Il y a des personnes qui peuvent nous recevoir en fait pour nous donner des conseils personnalisés, que ce soit CV, lettres de motivation et tout support, ou même l'entretien professionnel. Donc ça, c'est très intéressant.
The closing ceremony, it's a very emotional moment. With friends and family, we get together to commemorate this 10 months of well, craziness of an experience. It's also the moment to recap on the ambition that the students have on moving forward with their professional lives.
I think this year in college, it was a fascinating year, challenging year, but the best year.
C'est une année très demandante, mais qui m'a ouvert l'esprit, qui m'a permis de rencontrer des personnes extraordinaires que je n'oublierai jamais.
The college is a place where everything's happening all at once and constantly.
Il faut vraiment le vivre. C'est difficile de l'écrire avec des mots, il faut le vivre. Le Collège de l'Europe, c'est une expérience internationale, riche sur les plans humains, académiques et professionnels, que je recommencerai sans hésiter.
I hope that you have now got an impression. If you want to prepare for a career in European affairs where you really can make a difference, then you should apply to the College of Europe.
kindly ask you to take your seats. Thank you. Excellencies, Professors, ladies and gentlemen, dear students, the opening ceremony is about to begin. May I kindly ask you to turn off your mobile phones. Thank you. I am honoured to introduce our new President of the Administrative Council, Mr. Herman Van Rompuy.
Dear President of the European Council, dear Rector, meneer de burgemeester, meneer de gouverneur, Your Excellencies, dear professors and students, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor for the College of Europe to have the President of the European Council here at the opening session of the 70th academic year here in Brugge. The College is much older, Mr. President, than Poland's accession to the European Union. That was not possible at that time because you weren't a free country. It is 30 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall, a still improbable event, even at a time when wonder and admiration never last long. It was the beginning of the reunification of Germany and of Europe as a whole. It should not be forgotten that without Solidarność and the Polish Pope, this liberation and reunification would not have taken place. It should not be forgotten that 80 years ago, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The Second War began with Poland. Churchill once said, "For Poland's sake, we entered a war." It was about Danzig, Gdansk, a city that Donald Tusk knows so well. The tragic history of Poland in the 20th century is closely linked to that of Europe. It was therefore a powerful symbol when a Polish prime minister was awarded the highest office in the European Union. However, being a symbol is not enough to prevent crisis, as the President of the European Council unfortunately has to do. In a crisis, it's not a question of where you come from, but of what you do. A President of the European Council must keep the club of nations together, because all decisions are taken unanimously. It's a necessary, but not a sufficient condition for success. After all, results must be achieved. And in the course of your term of office, there were at least three main questions. Will Greece remain in the Eurozone, and will membership of the monetary union be irreversible or not? Will the refugee crisis be overcome, and will the union be able to protect its borders? Third question, will the UK leave the union in order or in chaos? And will it be the only one to choose the exit? The answer to all these questions has been positive. Only the Europe of results counts in the end. History does not remember words, just results. President Donald Tusk and his European Council demonstrated the Union's resilience against the prophets of doom. Yet, the multiple crisis was overcome. But the Union also proved successful in other areas. 14 million jobs have been created over the last 5 years. At the historic climate conference in Paris in 2015, the Union spoke with one voice on the most important issue of the times to come. It was a matter, it's still a matter, of life or death. And in the useless trade war, the Union remained the only credible defender of free and fair trade through the agreements, for instance, that we concluded with Japan and with the Mercosur countries, Argentina and Brazil in particular. We did so while a tariff war broke out. And while it broke out, the European caravan moved on. The Union kept its signature also in the Iran nuclear deal. It showed that it is in no ways a vassal of the US. The President is in the process of achieving results in the negotiations with China that will prove that no trade war is necessary to correct distortions. Our attitude, the European attitude, is twofold: firmness and dialogue. Strong on the principles, but always open to dialogue. And our British friends know what this means. Donald Tusk is an historian. He knows that history is the teacher of life, magistra vitae. History never repeats itself, at least not in the same way. There are no laws in history. We are history. And people do not allow themselves to be grasped by laws. But I personally never believe that the British withdrawal is once and for all. One day, a younger generation will correct that folly, not only because it is economically disadvantageous, but because a country alone cannot defend its ideals and its interests in a new world in which we already live. Isolation is no longer splendid. And the transatlantic link will be restored because the values of the West are stronger than one president. Over the next few years, the Union will continue to move forward towards greater autonomy when it comes to European champions in new technologies, greater autonomy when it comes to energy supply, to its own borders, and to its own security. We are far too dependent on others in the world today. We will continue to work on social and societal cohesion with each of our increasingly divided societies, and on cohesion between countries. We need to make our citizens feel more protected from real or perceived threats, such as unemployment and unstable jobs, mass irregular migration, climate change, terrorism, corruption and fraud, climate change, terrorism, military danger, and others. At the global level, we must be the standard bearers of multilateralism. It will be about order or chaos. How can we better protect our people without falling into protectionism? That's the question. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we can no longer seek the advice of Hannah Arendt, the patron of this promotion. She would warn us against rising totalitarianism and authoritarianism all over the globe. She would encourage the European Union to remain the fatherland of democratic values. Autonomy, cohesion, protection, unity and freedom are the key words for the Union in the coming years. President Tusk will not disappear from European politics. He will help to give substance to these and other concepts. Thank you for what you did and will do for our great European ideal. But there will always be a difference in style between you and me. The main distinction is that I'm a haiku poet and you are not. And that distinction will remain. I keep believing the Union can handle all the challenges I just mentioned. It will be with ups and downs. We will get up and fall. Too often we act too little and too late. There are many reasons to be skeptical, insecure, or anxious, but pessimism is a form of intellectual laziness. A pessimist is always right. Either his prophecy turns out badly, and he says, happily so. Or he, the pessimist, is right, and his reaction is, I told you so. So, better, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, to remain a man or a woman of hope. I am still a man of hope. Thank you so much. I will give the floor to the mayor of this beautiful and unique city of Bruges, Dirk de Vouw. You have the floor, Dirk.
Dear Mr. Tusk, President of the European Council, dear Mr. de Carlewick, Governor of the Province of West Flanders, dear Mr. Van Rompuy, President of the Administrative Council of the College of Europe, dear Mr. Monar, Rector of the College of Europe, ladies and gentlemen, dear professors and students, welcome to Bruges. First and foremost, I want to let you know that it is a great honor for the city of Bruges to have you as our guests. Dear students, many of you will achieve great things within Europe. Many people count on you to find solutions to the external and internal challenges within the European Union. Some of you want to leave the European Union. Just think about our friends of the United Kingdom. The date keeps getting postponed, but if the United Kingdom leaves the European Union, it will be the first member state to do so. This will bring about challenges, especially also for the city of Bruges, since the United Kingdom is an important partner when it comes to our harbor. We are preparing this scenario as best as we can, but it will also be up to your generation to prove that the European Union can face these challenges in the future. The presence of the College of Europe has been a privilege to Bruges since 1949. The college is a symbol of the union and cooperation between different countries. It attracts young Europeans with a thirst for knowledge and shapes them into critical citizens. Together, we can make Bruges a more European and even more international city, because it is thanks to the diversity, to the cooperation between people of different nationalities that Bruges became great during the Middle Ages. 600 years ago, Bruges was an important international and economic city. Even then, economic and political institutions faced challenges. Politics and economics had to be reformed and had to take new shapes. Even today, the European Union is questioned. Smaller regions want more active participation, entire groups of people have to move, and terrorist attacks take place in different countries. More than ever, I am convinced that we are in need of strong-minded people who believe in a Europe where cooperation is of great importance. We need leaders who hold dear the European values of liberty, equality, and solidarity. I am certain that Mr. Tusk will agree with me that we have to strive for a united Europe. In one of your recent speeches, Mr. Tusk, you said that only a Europe as a whole can face global challenges and the dangers which hide in our neighborhood. That is very true, and we must indeed be aware of the perils inside Europe. inside our own countries. In times where nationalism is on the rise, sometimes in extreme forms, it is interesting and even necessary to look back on our past and see how these nations come about and how we can learn from our past. And of course, we not only need a Europe where the citizens, but also the politicians shake each other's hand instead of turning their backs to each other. And therefore, dear students, I look in your direction. Because this is why you have taken up studies at the College of Europe. You will learn so much during your studies here. But I also hope that you will make time for leisure. I want to invite you to explore our beautiful town, visit our many museums, and learn about the rich history of this medieval city. The last week of November, Brugge will transform into a winter wonderland with thousands of lights and many Christmas trees placed throughout the city. You will be able to visit the Christmas market on the Market Square and the Simon Stevens Square. You will be able to ice skating on our environmental friendly skating rink located on the Mennewater Park. At the same location, there is also a winter bar to warm yourself, and you can follow 2 light trails with dynamic light installation, atmospheric lighting, and projections along the way. Dear students, in the next few months, you will all become a citizen of Brugge. And at the end of your stay, you will receive an official document which will give you the title of Bruggeling Honoris Causa, a document that you have to save for your grandchildren. Sincerely, I hope you will enjoy your stay in our city and that it will be forever occupy a space in your heart. Thank you for your attention. Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to give the floor to your rector, Mr. Jörg Bonaar, who will tell you more about the patron of this promotion, Hannah Arendt. Thank you very much.
Dear Mr. President of the European Council, dear President of the Administrative Council, mijn Herr de Gouverneur, mijn Herr de Burgemeester, Your Excellencies, dear friends and colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dear students. It is one of Aristotle's most famous quotations, his classification of man as a zoon politikon. It is often translated as political animal, but it's not an entirely correct translation. He referred actually to living being, so us being as a living being essentially political. According to him, it's only through man being part of a political community, the polis, that he can fully realize his nature and potential. I think the history of mankind has shown that this political dimension of our existence accounts for much of what we have been able to achieve as humans in terms of social, legal, scientific, economic, organizational, and even moral progress. Yet, at the same time, this, our political dimension, has also all too often been a pathway to the abysses of human nature, to unrestrained barbarism and the infliction of boundless suffering by some on their fellow human beings. How can it happen? How can it be explained that what belongs to our essence, our political dimension, what accounts for so much of the positive we have achieved, how can this turn to large-scale destruction of values, of lives, and the generation of evils which can poison an entire generation or even several ones. In 1933, a 26-year-old, intellectually wide-awake, strongly willed young researcher, Hannah Arendt, was confronted with one of those turns of politics into hell. Arguably one, if not the most calamitous in history, the coming into power of the Nazi regime in Germany. It changed her life. Until then, she had dedicated much of her life to the study of abstract philosophy, with a lot of initial academic recognition and much personal satisfaction. But seeing what she saw then, including the failure of some major philosophers in her home country, in Germany, to actually comprehend the unfolding brutal reality, made her turn to the understanding of politics. Nearly 30 years later, in 1964, in a television interview, she was asked what had been driving her quest deep into the nature and soul of politics ever since. And Hannah Arendt has responded on this occasion with three simple but very emphatically pronounced words: Ich will verstehen. Je veux comprendre. I want to understand. It is this relentless determination to understand by way of a thinking without banisters, as she called it herself, which has led her in many respects further than many or most of the contemporary thinkers in exploring the causes and conditions of human political existence, and especially in exploring the darker sides of it. In giving the name of Hannah Arendt to the promotion of its now 471 students of the academic year 2019-2020, the College of Europe wishes to honor and commemorate a political thinker whose rigor, originality, and tenacity has made us better understand the potential challenges and risks of politics, especially in the modern age. Essayons de retracer sommairement une vie qui a vite traversé les frontières, intellectuelles aussi bien que géographiques. Née le 14 octobre 1906 à Hannover, en Allemagne, Anna grandit dans un environnement familial d'un niveau d'éducation assez élevé et assez aisé. La famille est d'origine juive, mais les parents sont non pratiquants, et Anna expliquera plus tard que ce n'est pas à la maison qu'elle a appris d'être juive. Pour la jeune Anna, très vivace et curieuse, l'année 1913, elle a 7 ans, est une année noire. Elle perd d'abord son grand-père, très aimé, et puis à l'âge de 7 ans, son père affecté d'une paralysie progressive. Elle se referme plus sur elle-même et commence assez tôt à s'enfoncer dans les livres de la grande bibliothèque de son père. La jeune Anna est une très bonne élève à la fameuse Königin Luise Schule à Königsberg, découvre tôt la philosophie et, selon une tradition, parvient à lire la critique de la raison pure, les critiques der reinen Vernunft d'Immanuel Kant à l'âge de seulement 14 ans. Mais elle est aussi assez rebelle et se fait exclure en 1921 du lycée ayant boycotté un enseignant, ce qui la force de préparer son baccalauréat en tant que candidate libre. Anna passe son abitur, son baccalauréat en 1924, avec des résultats assez brillants, et commence presque immédiatement, à l'âge pour l'époque extraordinaire de 17 ans seulement, ses études de philosophie à l'université de Marburg. Elle a choisi Marburg surtout pour suivre les cours de Martin Heidegger, penseur existentialiste d'une grande originalité, mais aussi assez contesté. D'une forte assertivité intellectuelle, s'engagea en fond dans les discussions, même au risque de se rendre vulnérable, portant les cheveux courts, selon la dernière mode féminine de l'époque. Elle se fait remarquer. Elle se fait aussi remarquer par le professeur Heidegger, avec lequel elle commence en 1925 une liaison amoureuse qui ne durera d'ailleurs pas, puisque Heidegger ne veut risquer ni son mariage, ni sa carrière universitaire pour une affection sincère qui pourrait quand même tourner au scandale. Anna sera toujours reconnaissante envers Heidegger de lui avoir appris, comme elle a écrit, la liberté de penser. Mais en 1926, elle quitte Marburg, d'abord pour suivre le cours du célèbre phénoménologue Edmund Husserl à Freiburg, et puis pour commencer à Heidelberg une thèse de doctorat sous la direction de Karl Jaspers, autre grand penseur allemand d'orientation existentialiste, qui est beaucoup admiré par Anna à cause de son ouverture d'esprit et sa clarté d'expression et son exploration des grandes questions de la condition humaine. En novembre 1928, elle a tout juste 22 ans, Anna soutient avec succès sa thèse de doctorat sur le concept de l'amour chez Augustin. Son professeur pense qu'elle aura pu creuser le sujet un peu plus. Il faut admettre que parfois Anna Arendt a eu la tendance, avec son désir de tout comprendre, de passer assez vite d'un sujet à l'autre. Alors le professeur est un peu critique. Mais elle regardera Jaspers toujours un peu comme un père intellectuel, lui écrivant en 1957 que c'est vraiment lui qui l'a éduqué. Sa vie sentimentale dans ces années est marquée par le mariage en 1929 avec le journaliste et essayiste Günther Stern, aujourd'hui surtout connu sous son pseudonyme Günther Anders. Ils vivent ensemble et sont inquiets par la montée rapide du nazisme en Allemagne à partir de 1930. En partie face à l'agressivité accrue de l'antisémitisme, Anna commence à s'interroger plus sur sa position en tant que femme intellectuelle juive dans la société allemande. Elle commence à travailler sur une biographie de Rahel Wernhagen, écrivaine allemande d'origine juive de l'époque du romantisme. Et sans doute, en partie, elle s'identifiait à elle. Bénéficiaire d'une bourse de recherche scientifique, elle se trouve bien sur la voie d'une carrière universitaire en Allemagne quand intervient l'année charnière de 1933. Anna s'est décidée à ne pas rester neutre face à ces développements. Elle aide Karl Blumenfeld, président de l'Union sioniste allemande, à recueillir des témoignages de la propagande antisémite. En 1933, en juillet 1933, elle est arrêtée par la Gestapo, risque vraiment le pire, et a la chance inouïe d'être relâchée après 8 jours d'interrogation grâce à la sympathie d'un membre de la police judiciaire. Elle sait qu'il n'y a plus de temps à perdre et fuit avec sa mère à pied dans la nuit et à travers une forêt frontalière en direction d'abord de Prague pour arriver finalement, passant par Genève à sa destination d'exil choisie, Paris. Les 7 années à Paris de 1933 à 1940 voient Anna Arendt, l'exilée, survivre tout d'abord assez péniblement en tant que collaboratrice de différentes organisations juives soutenant les réfugiés juifs. Elle s'engage en particulier pour faciliter l'émigration d'enfants juifs rescapés de l'Allemagne. C'est la période de sa vie où elle a l'expérience la plus directe et concrète de l'impact d'un régime totalitaire sur la vie de ses victimes. Arendt ne voit plus maintenant, pour elle, un retour aux sphères supérieures et abstraites de la philosophie. Elle se tourne vers la pensée politique. S'étant séparée de son mari Günther Stern, qui, désespérant de leurs conditions de vie assez pénibles à Paris, est émigré aux États-Unis en 1936, Arendt fait un peu plus tard la connaissance d'un philosophe et communiste allemand engagé, Hans Blücher, avec lequel elle peut, et pourra d'ailleurs toujours dans la suite, explorer à fond ses efforts de compréhension théorique des bouleversements politiques du présent. Ils se marient en début 1940, quelques mois seulement avant leur internement en tant qu'étrangers indésirables dans différents camps français. Dans la confusion de la défaite française de juin 1940, Anna parvient à quitter le camp à pied, sans papier et sans ressources. C'est parfois pas mentionné dans la biographie, mais elle a dû travailler dans les champs pour assurer sa survie pendant ces semaines très critiques. Après d'autres péripéties difficiles, se sentant menacés par la collaboration des autorités françaises avec l'Allemagne nazie, Heinrich et Anna parviennent à obtenir des rares visas américains et quittent en janvier 1941 Marseille pour rejoindre par Lisbonne, New York. With Arendt's arrival, and the change of language is appropriate here, a new phase of her life starts. Having escaped from a Europe engulfed in the cataclysm of totalitarianism and war, she perceives the United States as a refuge of freedom of thinking and successful implementation of democratic and republican ideals. She will later write critically about the US society and certain tendencies in the US political system. I think she might write even more critically about the US system today, if she would have the chance. But at the time of Vietnam, for instance, she was very critical. But this critical stance of Hannah Arendt as regards the United States has never made her deviate from the fundamental appreciation of the Republican ideals which guided the American Revolution and the writing of the US Constitution. After 17 years of existence as a stateless person, Hannah Arendt will become a US citizen in 1951, and this is for her not an act only of administrative convenience, but it was also for her, I think, an act of faith. She also rapidly learns to master the English language with a striking sophistication in terms of vocabulary and nuances of expression. But I have to say that her German philosophical upbringing has always shined through her tendency to construct rather long and sometimes very complex sentences. Privately, she and her husband will also maintain a habit of using some French expressions at home. So at home, Hannah and Heinrich change between German, French, and English. Quite a multinational context. In the 1940s, Arendt rapidly emerges as an intellectually highly versatile and critical contributor in major political and philosophical magazines, such as the Partisan Review and the Review of Politics, to name only a few. In 1944, she is appointed research director of the Conference on Jewish Relations with the task of helping with the recovery of Jewish artifacts and libraries in liberated Europe. She also starts with editing work and from 1946 onwards works as an editor as a reputed house of Schocken books. And in parallel, she starts with teaching European history at Brooklyn College and starts writing on her first major book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, which appears in 1951. The book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, which provides an in-depth original analysis of Nazism and Stalinism as major totalitarian movements of the first half of the 20th century. It makes her almost instantly a celebrity in the US, but also in Europe. Arendt argues in The Origins that 19th century race thinking, anti-Semitism, and imperialism laid the foundations for totalitarianism in the 20th century. The decline of the nation-state in the context of multinational imperialism, the transnational dynamics of international capitalism, and the massive violence of the First World War have for Arendt all contributed to conditions of fundamental disorientation of citizens, of fear and disrespect for the rights of the individual. This provided for for her a toxic breeding ground for the emergence of totalitarian ideologies and regimes which propose total protection against insecurity and danger in exchange for total power and control over both masses and institutions, with the use of terror as an instrument to enforce their rule. In its ultimate form, for Arendt, totalitarianism is aimed at the extermination of all individuality, both morally and physically, and for this, the concentration camps of the Nazi regime are the utmost example. In the second edition of her book in 1958, Arendt added forceful reflections that individual isolation and loneliness, characteristics of the development of the modern societies, are also preconditions for totalitarian dominion. Arendt's Origins remains a somber book to read, perhaps today even more than 20 years ago. Arendt reminds us in the book how growing resentment in modern societies, feelings of exclusion and loss of support for party politics and parliaments can provide ample space for the propaganda of demagogues and endanger a freedom all too readily considered a given, but in reality always fragile. And Arendt writes, I cite, "What convinces masses are not facts." And when she writes, I cite again, "Totalitarian propaganda thrives on the escape from reality into fiction," it makes chilling reading today, especially in the context we are living through of populist contestation of fundamental rights and values. But Arendt was far from being only negative in her Origins, and this is sometimes overlooked. She expressed her conviction that government protecting human dignity remains always possible. It is our responsibility and the one of each citizen to engage for that. She also wrote in what must count amongst her most marking lines at the end of the Origins, I cite, that beginning is a supreme capacity of man, politically identical with man's freedom, and guaranteed by each new birth. The reference here to each new birth is made more moving by the fact that Hannah Arendt never had children of her own. The success of the Origins resulted in Arendt receiving an avalanche of invitations to give public speeches and lectures. From the 1950s onwards, until the end of her life, she accepted teaching assignments at numerous distinguished universities: Yale, Princeton, Wesleyan, the Northwestern University. The list is very long. I stop here. She very much enjoyed teaching, eager to exchange ideas with students. Many of them really adored her, in spite of her being a quite tough marker. She used to move readily into the ranks of the students when teaching, stopping and turning while speaking, and, at the time this was still possible, smoking in classrooms, normally during breaks, but sometimes also during classes. And there was always a student ready to help her light up the cigarette. These times have definitely passed, I would say. But as much as Hannah Arendt liked to teach and read all the student work, she constantly refused to accept tenure-track professorial positions. She preferred to keep her independence and to have the freedom to take up teaching offers in different academic backgrounds. She would have made an ideal visiting professor at the College of Europe. The various teaching assignments still left her ample time to continue with her research and writing. In her next major work, The Human Condition, published in 1958, Arendt attempted nothing less ambitious than to provide a systematic philosophical understanding of human activity. Making a distinction between the vita contemplativa, contemplative life, and vita activa, active life, she makes a case of the latter, active life, having been neglected in the philosophical tradition. She makes a distinction between labor, work, and action in this work. For her, labor is human activity directed meeting the mere objectives of ensuring survival. Work consists of a higher level of human activity, as it involves a process from implementing an idea through the creation of a finished durable product. But the highest form of human activity for her is action, which includes both speech and action as we understand it, as this is an activity by which human beings disclose, from her perspective, themselves to others, generate relationships, and ultimately create a potential for objectivity, as actions can be witnessed from different perspectives. In contrast to labor and work, action is for her neither circular nor limited to a defined end, but can have unpredictable consequences. Action, she emphasizes, is always collective and communicative. It is therefore also the ultimate domain of human freedom. Arendt strongly emphasizes our fundamental possibility as human beings, and even in a sense our responsibility of beginning something new. As man, I cite, those that must die are not born to die, but to begin something new. Also a very fundamental line, I think. She herself was certainly faithful to always engaging in something new, mostly writing at her desk with a view over the Hudson River in New York, in her Riverside apartment in New York. She kept publishing in total over 300 different articles and essays, some structured around certain themes. The list is long. I will just refer to one essay in the book Crisis of the Republic, which appeared in 1975, where she contributed to this book an essay on lying in politics, which analyzes, with a now, again, harrowing relevance to our times, how rapidly the fragile texture of our political and societal environment can be, I cite, torn to shreds by the organized lying of groups, nations, or classes, or denied and distorted, often carefully covered up by realms of falsehoods. Citation end. Always in search of further understanding, from 1961 to 1963, Arendt embarked on a journalistic assignment which would generate the biggest and still lasting controversy of her life. Covering for the journal The New Yorker the trial in Jerusalem of one of the key organizers of the Holocaust, SS officer Adolf Eichmann, who had been abducted and brought to Jerusalem by the Israeli Mossad, Arendt was deeply struck by the almost terrifying ordinariness, absence of malice, and blind bureaucratic sense of hierarchic responsibility of the accused. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, she has still developed thinking around the line that radical evil is the core reality of totalitarian system. But what she saw was an accused, Eichmann, who rather than being a determined monster of annihilation, had committed his deeds merely because of blind dedication to the regime, a need to belong to something, and absolute thoughtlessness about the consequences of his actions. This she tried to capture in the provocative subtitle of her 1963 book. The subtitle read, "A Report on the Banality of Evil." This book caused a storm of hostility. Arendt was accused of trying to defend Eichmann by banalizing his behavior and denying the unprecedented enormity of the Holocaust by suggesting that these deeds were simply part of the darker potential of all human beings. It must be added that the personal attacks on her, which came close to a character assassination and led many of her Jewish friends to break with her, were reinforced by her suggestion in the book that the administrative cooperation of some Jewish leaders with the Nazi authorities had contributed to the extent of the Holocaust. I think in this respect, she probably paid a price for her occasional tendency to provoke and overstate, as a controversy would certainly have been much less if she would have explained that there were indeed many examples in history, in the long and painful history of the Jewish people, of Jewish leaders having tried, through cooperation with the powers of the day, to mitigate the impact of that very persecution on the people. During the Holocaust, Jewish leaders had tried to do again what unfortunately they had painfully learned in history, only with the difference that with these persecutors, all cooperation would just be used to even reinforce the extermination. And this Hannah Arendt did not duly bring out, and it contributed very much to the controversy. Although supported by her always helpful husband and intellectual interlocutor Hans Blücher, and some close friends such as Karl Jaspers and the writer Mary McCarthy, Arendt felt deeply hurt by the Eichmann controversy. She lost many friends. But she never retracted her arguments, clarifying only that she considered Eichmann indeed guilty, but guilty and meriting the death penalty imposed by the Israeli court because of his refusal to consider the consequences of his actions. Questioned in an interview in 1964 about Eichmann's excuse that the duty of obedience had been the guiding principle of his whole life, Arendt replied this was an outrageous misuse of Kant's moral imperative, adding, "No man has, according to Kant, the right to obey." This phrase was rapidly corrupted by commentators to "Niemand hat das Recht zu gehorchen." Nobody has a right to obey, and has become one of the most famous phrases connected with Hannah Arendt. Although not entirely correct as a citation, it can be, I would say, considered as a sound reflection of her moral philosophy. Nobody has a right to obey. During the final years of her life, Arendt, still a prolific writer and lecturer, returned again to moral philosophy, working on a major new book, The Life of the Mind. She sustained in May 1974 a first heart attack, but recovered. But she refused to give up her heavy smoking. On the 4th of December 1975, shortly after her 69th birthday, she died of a further heart attack in her Riverside apartment with a page of The Life of the Mind in her typewriter and while entertaining friends. It was perhaps a fitting context for her passing away, as friendships had been a great personal resource for her throughout her life. In an essay of 1955, she had written about, I cite, the inherently worldless relationship between human beings as it exists in love and sometimes in friendship. And, citation again, when one heart reaches out directly to the other, as in friendship, the world goes up in flames. In accordance with her wishes, she was buried next to her beloved husband, with his name added to her now world-famous one, with a very simple gravestone, hardly reaching out of the soil, on which visitors today like to put small stones, as if they want to remind us of the numerous issues she wanted herself, and us to understand. Hannah Arendt's quest to understand, zu verstehen, has led her into the abysses not only of the history of the 20th century, but also of the human soul. She has explored these dark regions with unremitting intellectual courage and determination. Yet her Verstehen wollen of contemporary politics was never intended to be a solitary exercise. It was always oriented towards the other, because she wanted her readers, her students, and us to understand with her. Her critical thinking has always been intended to be action in the sense of activity beyond the contemplative, as defined in the book The Human Condition. There has always been something in her quest which goes back to the fundamental trust in the force of reason and the progress of freedom, which lies at the core of the essentially European Enlightenment. The critical reasoning of Kant is never far away from what she wants to tell us, and she is perfectly conscious in all of the writing of the European Enlightenment origins of what she regards as one of the great modern realizations of political freedom, especially in the United States. However, having witnessed the destructive forces of demagogic political obscurantism and the fragility of freedom in the 20th century, the fundamental optimism of the progress, as regards progress of the Enlightenment, is not any longer possible for Arendt. Instead, freedom appears all too fragile, subject to the terrible risks of a widespread abdication of critical, active political thinking. The Spanish painter Francisco José de Goya, Il Lucientes, having lived through the first cracks in the political and social progress optimism at the end of the Age of Enlightenment, has, in one of his famous Capriccio etchings, found a visual expression for the disasters which the absence of thinking can generate. It is entitled El sueño de la razón produce monstruos. The sleep of reasons produces monsters. 1.5 centuries after Goya, who had also been once under consideration as a patron de promotion at the college, 1.5 centuries after Goya etched this work, Hannah Arendt has seen the enormous extent into which these monsters envisaged by Goya can develop if critical political thinking, if political reason abdicates. She has therefore left us with a forceful message, admonition, I would even say, and task also, never to relinquish, both individually and collectively, our critical political thinking. To remain conscious that the objective of politics should be the safeguarding of the rights of the individual and freedom of each member of the political community, and that it is through communicative and collective action that this objective is best achieved. Dear students of the academic year 2019-20, I think you have reason to be proud of bearing the name of Hannah Arendt, a very courageous lady and thinker. May her fundamental message of our individual political responsibility accompany you through this year at the college and never leave you throughout your life and career afterwards. Then you will not be only bearing her name, but will also be worth it. Thank you very much. I now have the great honor to ask the President of the European Council, Sir Donald Tusk, to take the floor.
Dear Rector Monar, dear Governor Mr. de Calouet, dear Mayor Mr. Defoe, dearest Herman, my friend and predecessor, Your Excellencies, dear students. I want to first thank the Rector of the College of Europe, Jörg Monar, both for the invitation and for the masterful lecture on the life and thought of Hannah Arendt that he has just presented. Thank you, Professor, for your hospitality and for setting the scene so well, especially in view of what I have to say today. When I heard that this year's College of Europe promotion was dedicated to Hannah Arendt and that I was invited to inaugurate the academic year, I was more than happy for two reasons. Firstly, because Arendt is an intellectual heroine for me. And secondly, because we are in the magnificent city of Brugge. Even if not formally, it is a sister city to Gdańsk, my hometown. Both are in competition for the title of Venice of the North. Both are ancient arteries of European trade, when North and South met in medieval Europe. Both were geopolitical nodes in the Hanseatic League. Both hosted English and Scottish merchants, deeply integrated into the European economy, trading in wool and grain. And both are the homes, in different ways, of the old Flemish masters, who, you may not know it, are my favorite school of European painting. Brugge is where the work of Jan van Eyck and others came to life. Meanwhile, Gdańsk is where the Last Judgment, the work of another famous Bruggeling, Hans Memling, now hangs in the National Museum. I didn't expect a few years ago, when I was showing Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte this painting in Gdańsk, that within a year Europe would come to resemble some bits of the Last Judgment. If you remember the painting, you will know exactly what I have in mind. I would like to begin my speech with a personal remark. There are three women who are connected with this place and with this ceremony, and who have had a great influence on my life. I have already mentioned Hannah Arendt. I have taken with me today this book. It's just a few chapters from The Life of the Mind, one of the famous books of Hannah Arendt, which we published illegally in communist Poland in 1988. Philosophy tastes best when it is forbidden. She wrote, the sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. It is an important thought. Exactly in the same year, 1988, a second heroine of my young years, Margaret Thatcher, said here in this college, during the same ceremony as today, "We must never forget that, east of the Iron Curtain, peoples who once enjoyed a full share of European culture, freedom, and identity have been cut off from their roots. We shall always look on Warsaw, Prague, and Budapest as great European cities." 2 months later, I welcomed her together with Lech Wałęsa and Polish workers outside the Gdańsk shipyard. On that day, we had a feeling that the Iron Curtain was about to fall and that a new era of freedom and unity was coming. I also have a great fondness for a third European woman, a student of your college, who also spoke here some time ago on the same occasion as today, the then Danish Prime Minister, Helle Thorning-Schmidt. I am here today largely thanks to her. In 2014, she was my main contender for the position of President of the European Council. But at the request of Herman Van Rompuy, Helle withdrew her candidacy and supported mine. As you can see, my fondness for her is deeply justified. In a few days, I will end my mission, so I feel obliged to tell you what I actually did here in the last 5 years. Please don't worry, I will be brief. It may sound banal, but when I am asked what my term has been about, I answer without hesitation: unity. A leitmotif, a task, almost my obsession from the very beginning. On the day of my departure to Brussels at the Warsaw airport, quite by accident, I met Lech Wałęsa. When Wałęsa heard I was on my way to take over the European Council from Herman Van Rompuy, he reacted impulsively. I just hope this union doesn't fall apart with you there. It looks bad enough already. It is therefore no surprise that during the handover ceremony on the 1st of December 2014, in my very short 2-minute speech, I mentioned the word unity 3 times. My message was this: what Europe needs is protecting our fundamental values: solidarity, freedom, unity against the threats to the EU and its unity, coming from both inside and outside. Politics has returned to Europe. History is back, and such times need leadership and political unity. I told you I was obsessed with unity. My exercise in unity, of course, started practically on day 1. First, it was about Kremlin's aggressive policy. I was, and still am, convinced that in this game, what is at stake is not only the future of independent Ukraine and the security of Central Europe, including that of my country, but the sovereignty of Europe as a political entity. And I had no doubt that Putin's strategic goal was not only to regain control of the former Soviet Union territories, but also to systematically weaken the EU by provoking internal divisions. I had to publicly remind others almost every week that Russia is not our strategic partner, but our strategic problem. I was even labeled a monomaniac for being so focused on this subject. But eventually it paid off. We maintained our unity also in terms of sanctions throughout my entire term. The second test was protecting the unity of the Eurozone. I never pretended to be an expert, like Herman is, on the common currency or banking. I saw the Greek crisis in political and geostrategic rather than financial categories. That is why I did everything to avert the risk of Grexit. As a typical representative of the Northern School, I have always believed that you shouldn't spend more than you have. But despite this belief, I protected the Greeks from the overly tough and, at times, orthodox approach of the Germans and the Dutch. Not because I have always been in love with Greek culture. In fact, I rate Johann Sebastian Bach's music and Vermeer's paintings as highly as the sculptures of the Parthenon. But because I knew that the Eurozone could collapse as a result of the sides in this conflict going one step too far. And this, in fact, almost happened. On that fateful night of the 12th of July 2015, when Chancellor Merkel and Prime Minister Tsipras were on the verge of walking out on each other at 4 o'clock in the morning, I closed the door and told them, sorry, but there is no way you are leaving this room until you agree. 4 hours later, I announced our agreement. The Eurozone was saved, and today Greece is one of the more promising economies of the Union. The third challenge was building a consensus around a common migration policy. I saw from the start that divisions here could be very dangerous. Disputes about asylum policy, especially mandatory relocation, triggered emotions and resentments on a great scale. This is why the number one priority for me was to reject the alternative of Open Europe versus Fortress Europe. I felt it was essential to avoid painting black and white images. The advocates of tight external borders were accused of xenophobia and the lack of solidarity, while the proponents of Willkommenpolitik, of letting in terrorists and unacceptable submission. The Benelux countries, the Germans and Scandinavians, wanted greater determination in the actions of southern countries, but frankly speaking, they were loudest in criticizing eastern countries for their lack of solidarity. And Southern Europe joined this anti-Eastern choir because it was much easier to propose mandatory relocation than to protect borders. The way to ease the tension was, first and foremost, to make all the countries realize that there was no inherent contradiction between liberal democracy and effective controls of our external borders. That we must help refugees, but not abandon our primary duty to protect our territory. Of course, the problem of migration has not disappeared and will keep us busy in the years to come. But we have succeeded in persuading most actors to calm their emotions and focus on more pragmatic initiatives that protect our borders, on the fight with people smugglers, as well as cooperation with Libya and other African countries, and of course the deal with Turkey. And finally, our unity on Brexit. As I say these words, the UK is still a member of the European Union and will remain so until the end of my term. But I will not pretend that this is some kind of success, because Brexit may happen at the beginning of next year. I did everything in my power to avoid the confrontational no-deal scenario and extend the time for reflection and a possible British change of heart. I've been called a romantic and an Anglophile, both terms, in my opinion, quite suitable and merited. Most importantly, however, Brexit hasn't divided us. The EU 27 have maintained extraordinary self-discipline and loyalty among themselves, despite London's attempts to bilateralize these negotiations. During the past 5 years, it was also necessary to put a brake on so-called creative ideas and initiatives such as a smaller club, the core of Europe, and others. They stemmed in part from the frustration of federalists and from often justified complaints about some states blocking further integration. Paris was particularly active here, paradoxically, especially after the election of President Macron, a sincere and energetic European. As I said in Rome during the ceremony marking the 60th anniversary of the treaties, I cannot accept the return of a multi-speed Europe. I spent half of my life behind the Iron Curtain, in the Soviet sphere, under the communist regime, so I know very well what a two-speed Europe really means. The unity of the EU requires mutual patience, not coercion. On various occasions, whenever the pace of integration is raised, I like to quote an African proverb: if you want to go quickly, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. In our thinking about the future of Europe, we should be guided by our common sense and a sense of timing. We cannot condemn ourselves to the false alternative of quick integration or collapse of the Union. It is worth rediscovering again and again the path, sometimes winding, sometimes quite narrow, that leads between utopia and dystopia. Unity will not be built by extreme Eurosceptics or radical federalists. I have tried to stick to this winding and narrow path all along. Another everyday exercise in unity was, and should remain, the protection of the smallest member states, the ones in greatest need, the most vulnerable. Germany and France are bigger than Malta or Lithuania, but that doesn't mean that they are more right, at least not always. Serving the unity of the EU has also sometimes meant opposing the will and intentions of the most powerful. This wasn't, of course, about any kind of affirmative action in favor of smaller countries, but about the principle of equality of rights and objectivity, regardless of who benefits from it. Without dogmatism, of course. After all, even the Germans are sometimes right. I am quite aware that in politics, as in life, size matters. But the EU was invented also so that strength is not the only decisive factor. So that in our internal policy, what decides is the power of argument and not the argument of power. Whenever necessary, I formulated fairly brutal warnings like Cyprus is not for sale or do not throw Ireland under the bus. And I also protected new member states against the arrogance of some older ones with varying degrees of success, of course. The principle of one for all and all for one sounds nice, but we cannot force it upon others. After all, we are talking about solidarity here, which is something that cannot be enforced. Either it's there or it isn't. I remember when during a debate on relocation at the European Council summit, it was suggested that in our conclusions, we include the term the obligation of solidarity. I protested, saying this was an obvious oxymoron. And I know what I am saying, I still feel like an expert in solidarity. In my office of the President of the European Council, I keep a self-made poster with the inscription, "It's the unity, stupid." I made it to always remember what is most important. And I will leave it there, just in case. Finally, if you allow me, I want to tell you something I wouldn't have dared to say a few months ago, as I could be fired for being too frank. And today it is simply too late to impeach Donald, at least the European one. In fact, I envy John Bercow that he can finally honestly say what he thinks about Brexit. I will also touch upon this subject. I have heard repeatedly from Brexiteers that they wanted to leave the European Union to make the United Kingdom global again, believing that only alone it can truly be great. You could hear in these voices a longing for the empire, but the reality is exactly the opposite. Only as part of a united Europe can the UK play a global role. Only together can we confront, without any complexes, the greatest powers of this world. In fact, I can say the same about Germany or France. And the world knows it. I have heard the same in India, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and South Africa, that after its departure, the UK will become an outsider, a second-rate player, while the main battlefield will be occupied by China, the United States, and the European Union. Why are they doing this? I was asked this regretful question everywhere I went. One of my English friends is probably right when he says with melancholy that Brexit is the real end of the British Empire. The UK election takes place in 1 month. Can things still be turned around? Hannah Arendt taught that things become irreversible only when people start to think so. So the only words that come to my mind today are simply, don't give up. In this match, we had added time, now we are in extra time. Perhaps it will even go to penalties. Now turning to the French president, one of the undisputed leaders of the European Union and our hope for the future, and my dear friend. I want to tell him that I share his dream of a truly sovereign Europe. I am convinced that we are capable of it, on condition that we will act as a sovereign. And not the way it was recently in the case of EU enlargement. There will be no sovereign Europe without stable Balkans integrated with the rest of the continent. And you don't need to be a historian to understand this. And there will be no sovereign Europe without an independent Ukraine. Our tough and consistent stance on Russia was the first expression, so clear and unambiguous, of our sovereignty. We must persevere in this. And this is why when I hear Macron's words that we must reconsider our position with Russia to rethink the strategic relationship, I can only express hope that it will not happen at the cost of our common dreams about Europe's sovereignty. In the same interview for The Economist, President Macron says that he shares the same views on the subject as Viktor Orban, and that he hopes that Mr. Orban will help convince Poles to change their position on Russia. Maybe, but not me, Emmanuel. And finally, what is most important to me, I have always underlined the role of compromise in European politics. Compromise, negotiations, consensus, the key word without which you cannot understand the EU. There are, however, things and issues that cannot be the subject of compromise and negotiations. And I am talking about our fundamental values: freedom, the rule of law, the dignity of individuals. What's the point of unity, sovereignty, and solidarity if we are unable to defend Europe, understood as a territory of freedom, culture, and law, against external and internal opponents? If we are unable to defend Europe also against our weaknesses and misgivings, against the temptation to make deals with evil, and against submission to the powerful and ruthless. Europe is not a continent in a geographical sense. It is a continent in an axiological sense. And it will remain so as long as we have enough strength to protect not only our borders and interests, but first and foremost, the essence of Europe. After all, we don't want our part of the world to be, as shown on a physical map in a school atlas, simply a large but peripheral peninsula of the Great Eurasia. Thank you.
I now invite Julia and Jonathan, two of our student representatives, who would like to now deliver a short message on behalf of the student body.
President Tusk, President Van Rompuy, Governor de Caluwe, Mayor Defoe, Rector Monar, distinguished guests, faculty, staff, and last but certainly not least, fellow students of the College of Europe. My name is Giulia Scamacca, and I am a student from Italy and Germany, studying for a master in European economics. And with me is Jonathan Misk, a student from the United States, who's currently pursuing a Master of Arts in Transatlantic Affairs. And we are both elected student representatives of the College of Europe. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share these brief remarks on behalf of our fellow students at this wonderful opening ceremony of the Hannah Arendt promotion. Reflecting on the messages shared by Presidents Tusk and Van Rompuy and Rector Monar, we too want to recognize the importance of commemorating as patron a trailblazer whose views on the dangers of extremism ring especially true today. À nos chers étudiants, c'est un honneur pour nous neuf de vous représenter et nous sommes impatients de continuer à travailler avec vous tous pendant cette année universitaire. To President Tusk, on behalf of the entire student body, thank you for sharing with us, after 5 years as President of the European Council, your views about not only the future of Europe, but also the realities of the world in which Europe finds itself today. Your presence here is a tremendous honor for all of us, fellow Europeans, neighbors, transatlantic and transnational friends alike. As our classmates know, much of our time here this semester has been spent contemplating a fundamental question: what exactly is the EU? Certainly, it's an important academic exercise, but whether we conclude that it's a consortiation, a confederation, or some sui generis actor, what ultimately matters is that the EU, and Europe more generally, is so much more than a mere instrument. It is a mechanism that allows us, its members, to not only share their values broadly, but also to respond to challenges to which no one member state could respond alone. But the European Union must not be viewed only from within the borders of continental Europe. Speaking recently while accepting the Globsec European Award, President Tusk underscored the fact that Europe, or in a wider perspective, a transatlantic community, has found itself today at a political crossroads. He explained that until recently, we had been a political and axiological community, which was integrating and enlarging, while today it is starting to disintegrate and shrink. But he also offered an optimism that all of us in this room share, appealing to European citizens and politicians to take on your shoulders the responsibility for Europe as a whole, for Europe as a community, and we might add, for the world as a community too.
As the tide of nationalism and populism continues to advance, causing even traditional global players to retreat further and further from the international stage, it is incumbent upon the EU, working with its allies, to be a leader capable of addressing a variety of new challenges, whether the immigration crisis, climate change, disinformation, or evolving labor market dynamics. President Tusk, President Van Rompuy, Rector Monar, distinguished guests, faculty, and staff, we humbly submit that the next generation of international leaders ready to tackle those challenges is sitting right here in this room. And they are here because the College of Europe is the best place for them to acquire the tools necessary to succeed in this increasingly globalized world. The college's intimate size, proximity to Brussels and other international powerhouses, and extensive and dynamic alumni network collectively demonstrate that the college understands the importance of not only learning about international politics and diplomacy, but also practicing them. Our studies at the College of Europe, owing directly to these strengths, represent a critical prerequisite to our success. Once again, it has been an honor to offer these remarks on behalf of our fellow students of the Hannah Arendt promotion. We are extremely excited to now officially begin the 2019-2020 school year, which so far has offered us unforgettable academic and extracurricular opportunities. And yes, a healthy dose of esprit de collège. We pledge to continue to represent the college as an international, open-minded, and engaged community of students proud to study in the heart of Europe. And we look forward to working together in the future, wherever in this increasingly interconnected world that may be. Merci à tous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The final word. I listened more than carefully to what my successor said, and it reminded me the word of Paul-Henri Spaak. Paul-Henri Spaak gave a very special definition of culture. That is what remains after you have forgotten everything. You have never to justify what you have known. That's the advantage of the definition. So Donald Tusk had this broad experience of 5 years, crisis after crisis, much more than I had to face. But that was not his message of today. Message of today is what remains. What remains is this deep European conviction. And without that conviction, you cannot get a consensus in the European Council. Without that conviction, you cannot convince others to go forward. So ideas and ideals are much more important than most people think. It's not only about the technicity, of the technicality of finding a solution or a compromise, but all depends on the strong political will, the strong conviction, the strong belief in the European idea. And you brought it, Donald, I can call you so, not only in an intellectual way, but with real authenticity. Only those who come from the other side of the Iron Curtain can testify all this with the authenticity you showed this evening. I'm really impressed. I'm really proud that you are my successor. I now officially announce the opening of the academic year.
The student choir will now sing the European anthem, and I invite them onto the stage. May I kindly ask everyone to stand? Thank you. I would like to invite the student representatives onto the stage to meet our presidents. And I invite the audience already to go to the reception, which is here just outside. And we will all join you in a few moments. Thank you.